All of our recordings go up onto our YouTube channels and get sent out as an email so that people who aren't able to join us on the night can watch after. And please feel free to share the link with anyone you think might be interested. And I think this topic will be particularly interesting to people at the minute. So my name is Jenny Smith, and I host these sessions on behalf of Stroud District Green Party. We are returning with the January Cloud Cafe, and we've got a topic that I think is in everyone's minds and hearts at the minute, and wallets. We're talking about finances, green finances, and how people can get the support they need and get more to help themselves and help their families. So after years of austerity, with the spiraling cost of food and energy, freezes on pay and benefits, almost everybody is concerned about money. And also we have a huge lack of assurance and trust in our banks and institutions, and that they're looking after our money in an ethical and responsible way. So some things that we'll be considering this evening: whether our banks are are interested in helping communities and how they do that. Are they investing in our communities? How we can help ourselves? What else is out there in terms of help and money and advice that maybe people don't realize that they can access? We have two fantastic speakers with us this evening, and I will introduce each one as we go. If everybody could mute themselves, and if you're not a speaker, turn off your camera so that we can keep noise to a minimum for the recording, that would be great. And thank you everybody for joining, and we're very happy to see you all here on what is probably a very grey and dreary January afternoon or evening. So our first speaker is Tom Levitt. He is a consultant for Sector for Focus and the co-founder of Fair for You, a responsible lending company, supporting people in poverty by preventing them from spiraling into debt with loan companies. The organisation has a new partnership with Iceland Supermarket that makes £75 interest-free loans available to tens of thousands of people to help with the cost of living crisis. There are no penalty charges, no repossessions, and it actually has the aim of improving the borrower's credit score. So I'm sure Tom is going to tell us lots more about this. It sounds very interesting to me. So thank you very much, Tom, and kick us off.
Well, thank you very much indeed. And first of all, it's a great pleasure to be talking to people from Stroud. As Barbara remembers, I used to live on Rodborough Hill. I was a member of Stroud District Council for a couple of years in the mid-80s. I was the Labour candidate in 1987 and for the European elections in 1989. Since then, I went off and became the Member of Parliament for High Peak in Derbyshire for 13 years. That ended 13 years ago. And in that intervening period, I have, as you say, been a consultant on responsible and sustainable business. The proudest moment of which in those last 12 years was helping to set up Fair for You, and it's Fair for You that I want to talk about today. I'm sorry that I don't see Adrian Oldman's name on the list of people in front of me, because it was Adrian who got me involved in all this in the first place. He introduced me to a former banker who'd left banking because she realized that banking was not designed to help people on the lowest of incomes. And she then spent some time as a chief executive of a credit union. And she was equally frustrated because, of course, for a credit union, you have to be a member of a common bond and you have to be a saver. And unfortunately, there's a strata of society where saving is simply not on the agenda. And you can imagine at the moment, not many people on low incomes are finding anything to save. So she wanted to find an alternative, and to give her credit, her name was Angela Clements, and to give her credit, people were writing reports about the Fair for You model even before Fair for You existed. because she realized that once someone has been effectively abandoned and not got the support of the high street banks, then the only alternative at that time was to go to a high cost high street lender. And we know that people like Wonga, who were around at the time, 1,000% APR and more. And you can still find 1,000% APR deals. I say deals, sometimes deals with no alternative, still out there now. So what Fair for You did was to really provide an ethical alternative. And how did I get involved? Well, Angela wanted to set up a business, and Adrian quite rightly advised her that if she set up as a private business, then people would not take it seriously. They'd say, you're just out to fleece people, you're just out to maximize profit. So he advised you need to do it either as a social enterprise or a charity. At which point Angela threw her arms in the air and said, I'm a banker, I don't know anything about social enterprises and charities. And Adrian said, well, Tom does. So he introduced me to her, and we designed this social enterprise owned by a charity. And since day one, I have chaired the charity that owns the CIC, the community interest company that is Fair for You. Just to clarify that, a community interest company is not allowed to, well, it is allowed to pay dividends, but only up to 40% of the profits that are made. We haven't had that problem because we've spent 6 years not making profits, but I'll come back to that a bit later. But we have to have a mission, and our mission is precisely as Jenny described it at the beginning. And one of the roles of the charity is to make sure that the trading arm, if you like, the CIC, sticks to its mission, which is, in 2 words, is tackling poverty. So this was about 2014, and just let me give you an example of what was going on at that time. There was a company called Bright House, who no longer exist, fortunately. But basically, if you went into one of their showrooms, if you went into someone like Curry's and you said, I'd like that £250 washing machine, but I don't have the cash, can I have credit? And they say to you, no, because you're not credit worthy, then where do you go? And the answer is back then, the answer was you either went to a high cost credit backstreet lender, or, and there's a rise in this at the moment, you go to illegal, unregulated lenders. Out there is also now this phenomenon known as buy now, pay later, which is a phenomenon which is actually unregulated. One of the things that we're campaigning for is to make sure that our competitors are regulated in the same way that we are, because Fair for You is FCA regulated. Anyway, back to Bright House. So if you went as an alternative to Curry's, because you couldn't get the washing machine from Curry's, and you said to Bright House, I'd like that £250 washing machine, they would say to you, certainly, £10 a week. And you would think, well, £10 a week, if I've got 2 or 3 kids, then that's cheaper than going to the laundrette. I'll have that. £10 a week, however, for 3 years, not just paying for the cost of the washing machine, but paying compulsory insurance, compulsory additional warranty, compulsory cost of delivery, compulsory cost of taking away. £10 a week for 3 years is £1,500 for a £250 washing machine. Angela's model was £7 a week for 1 year, no added extras, and therefore a saving, you can see that as £350, in other words, a saving of over £1,000 for some of the lowest paid people, the lowest income people in the country. It was really, really significant. And she believed she could make this work, partly by stripping out a lot of the costs. We're not a furniture or an electricals seller. We are a finance company. We have 1 office, we have 30 employees now, and we serve the whole of the United Kingdom, and we do it online. And frankly, 10 years earlier, we couldn't have done it because the online technology wouldn't have been available to us at the cost that we were able to acquire it at. So we decided to make a go of this, and we set out getting funding because we didn't just need funding to run a business, we needed funding because funding was what we needed to give to our customers. And fortunately, when I'd been in Parliament, I'd chaired for 10 years the all-party group on the voluntary sector, and I knew some of the big charitable organisations. And it was the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, it was the Barrow Cadbury Foundation, and it was the Tudor Trust, who came together and got us our initial funding. And we thought we were available in England, Wales and Scotland, and we were very surprised when the very first loan we gave out was to Northern Ireland. But since then, we have been trading and growing and achieving a score of 4.9 on Trustpilot. Now, how do we get 4.9? Bear in mind, a high street bank normally trades at about 1.5 to 2 on Trustpilot. We were at 4.8, 4.9 consistently now for 5 years. The way we do this, the way we achieve that, is because we have not repossessed a single item of furniture in the time we've been operating. We have not issued one penalty fine. With Bright House, if you were a day late, you had £5 added to your bill. And that, of course, made it even harder to pay your bill. We don't fine people. We don't have the ability to do that. And we provide really excellent customer service. So if someone misses a week's payment, then we will probably overlook it. If they miss 2 weeks' payment, we will give them a phone call. Have you got a problem? Can we help? And typically we would help by saying, well, you missed 2 weeks. We'll take those 2 weeks and we'll add them on at the end instead. So there's no extra charge. It just takes 2 minutes with a mouse as far as we're concerned. So there's no extra cost to us. It takes us two weeks longer to get the money back. But the whole point is we're getting the money back and we're recycling it. And by recycling that money, we're able to maximize the number of people we're able to help. So over the last 5 or 6 years, we have given out 40,000 loans, averaging £400 to £500. They are largely for white goods, washing machines, fridges. Also things like children's beds are very popular. We do a wide range of individual goods, but we also now include some stores as well. So Halfords has just joined us. We have Dunelm, various others, specialists as well as general stores. And of course, we have people who can't fulfill the undertaking they're given to pay us. And that's built into our business plan. We know there are some people who are going to fail. And as I say, we don't penalize them. What we are able to do is to claim from if they've been about 18 months, say, without paying us anything, then we can start to get that money back at £1 a week from the DWP. They take it from people's benefit and pass it over. Obviously, we would rather that didn't happen, but we need to keep going in order that we can provide more. What we have had is people who've defaulted come back to us maybe a year or 18 months later saying, I'd now like to pay you the last £100 that I owe you. Please, can I have another loan? And if they are not in debt to us, then yes, of course, we can do that. Now, I note that I've had my 10 minutes, but Jenny, you mentioned Iceland, and I'd like to just tell you what we're doing with Iceland, because as I said, we've done 40,000 mainstream loans at the same interest rate as credit unions charge, roughly speaking. And the actual repayments, because they're generally repaid in less than a year, the actual repayments are less than the headline interest rate might suggest. But just before I go on to Iceland, we measure our success by the social impact that we have. And we measure the social impact simply by asking our customers what does having a loan from us mean to you? And they speak very highly of us, as I say, because of the excellent customer service they get. But they talk about, reducing stress in the home. They talk about children attending school better. They talk about using the money to provide hot meals for their kids, and things like mental health measurements all improve. We have the statistics. This is all published. We've done 3 reports now about this. But the other main thing is that they improve their credit records. And that means that they can either stay with us and borrow again, or they can move into mainstream borrowing, go back to Curry's or what example, where, and I admit this absolutely, they will get a lower rate of interest because someone with a higher credit risk, a higher credit score is regarded as, quite rightly regarded as someone as less of a credit risk. Anyway, about 4 years ago, I was speaking at a conference with my consultant's hat on, and the speaker after me was Richard Walker, who's the CEO of Iceland Supermarkets. And he's a man who's does have a social conscience and tries to run a responsible and ethical business. And we had a long conversation about the needs of his customers. And 4 years on, and having tested this to great extremes for a year, this summer we launched a scheme with Iceland for a £75 interest-free loan. Now, why did Iceland come to us and say they wanted to do this? The answer is that at the beginning of every school holiday, most supermarkets see their takings go up because families buy more because they've got the kids at home for a few weeks and so on. At Iceland, they go down because people are on restricted incomes. It's a low financial demographic which they serve, and they have to make that money. They have to make that money go further. So their actual spending goes down. And clearly that means that at a time when they need more food in the house, they're actually bringing in less. So that wasn't good for the customer, and it certainly wasn't good for Iceland either. So what we developed was this £75 interest-free loan. Now, I say interest-free carefully because it is an interest-free loan for the customer, but Iceland pays us the interest that would have been paid on it had the customer been paying at our standard rate of interest. So it's still commercially viable for us. And they're allowed to top it up once every half term. We have a window of about a week. Anyway, I mentioned that we had 40,000 loans in the first 6 years, the mainstream loans. In our first week of running the Iceland scheme, starting in August, we had 40,000 applications, 40,000 people for whom £75 was a really significant amount of money, which was going to make a huge difference. We'll be publishing in the next, I think I'm right, 6 weeks or so, an analysis of how the social impact of the Iceland scheme, because we're onto our third window now, and I'm absolutely certain that it will come out to be exactly as effective and impactful, making a real difference to people's lives. So I'm going to stop there. I've done a quarter of an hour. I've seen there are some questions coming through, issues there. How do people know about it was one. Yes, Simon, I was on SDC for a couple of years. How do people find out about us? Largely through Facebook. Facebook has up to now been where we get most of our referrals from, Facebook and word of mouth. But I have to say that the Iceland scheme is giving people a really big opportunity to see what else they can get from us and what we have to offer. We are significantly, as I've said, cheaper than the rogues out there and the cowboys out there. We are slightly more expensive than in practice than a bank would be, or a courier's finance would be. But people do know that those lower rates are simply not accessible to them. We are the lowest rate that is accessible to them. And we don't make massive profits. In fact, up to now, we haven't made any profits at all. This year, however, we will be making a small amount of profit. It will stay in the business. No profit will be taken out. And I think just to end with a slight irony, in that one of the last things I did when I was in Parliament was to sit on a committee for a bill which allowed the government to take the dormant assets from bank accounts. In other words, money that people have put in bank accounts and haven't touched for 20 years. You know, they could be dead, it could be just simply forgotten accounts and things like that. And there were millions and millions of pounds available in that. Well, for the last 3 or 4 years, the majority of our external funding, the money that we need in order to be able to lend, has come from an organisation called Fair for All Finance. Fair for All Finance is a body set up by the government to distribute that money from the dormant assets. So if I hadn't have been on that bill 15 years ago, passing it through Parliament, then we might not have had the resources to get where we are now with Fair for You. Really producing very high levels of social value. I'm very, very proud of what we've done. And thank you also, Simon, for putting the Fair for You website in the chat there as well. Spot on, please have a look. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tom. And thanks for kicking us off on our January Cloud Cafe. I think that was a really interesting overview. And, you know, even if the people in this meeting, maybe whether or not they would be able to benefit from your services, like, we should be taking this knowledge away and telling the people that need to know about these kinds of services. I think what you said about word of mouth and Facebook and things like that, you know, people only know what they know, and if they don't know, then they don't know. And so anybody that you think would be helped by these services, please share the website, share the information, so that more people can get the help that they need, especially in this cost of living crisis that we find ourselves. So thank you so much, Tom. There might be some more questions as we go through the next presentation that we can pose to you at the end of this session as well. So thank you very much for your presentation. Okay, so our next speaker is Gary, who you might recognize because I think he's joined quite a few of our Cloud Cafes before as a non-speaker, but as a attendee. So at 31, Gary had a negative net wealth, and yet at 47, he was able to retire and found Sustainably Enough Community Interest Company. Since October 2021, he has helped people across the world to optimize their spending, build financial resilience, invest efficiently, and give effectively. Due to the lack of knowledge on the subject and without access to advisors, people don't have much of a chance in these worlds. And I know that I'm definitely one of those people who has no knowledge and not much interest as well, if I'm very honest. But I know it's something that's so important and that can have a huge impact on your mental and even physical health. As Tom was saying, you know, those invisible things that we don't realize are being impacted by financial worries are really serious. So thank you, Gary, and take 15 minutes if you like as well. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Jenny, and thanks, Tom. I thought that was brilliant. What you're doing is great and came across really well. I'm just going to share a screen. I'm going to make up for Tom's lack of slides, not that it was a lack, and by having quite a few. So there is quite a lot, but it is recorded. You can have a look and you can ask questions. So I'll just share my screen and then I'll talk through. Everyone see that okay?
Perfect, yep.
Yeah. So Tom spoke about the great work his organisation is doing, and that's got a vitally important role. My talk's aimed at those in a slightly different place, those who are broadly doing okay, but would like to be doing better. One of the keys to sustainability is consuming less, but that's quite a hard sell. However, all we really want to be is happy, and that provides an opportunity. Most of us can boost our happiness whilst consuming less, but we need to be able to spend mindfully. Only about 8% of the population have access to financial advice, And even that 8% rarely receives advice focused on overall happiness and sustainability. Tonight, I'll talk about that. There will be some tips about how to save money, but I won't go into that particularly because that space is really well covered by Martin Lewis, and money saving expert. But we're faced with some of the brightest minds in society trying to part us from our money. Tonight's talk will help you to use your money in a way that helps you and not businesses. We're focused on 4 key areas: some helpful psychology to help you save money, some top tips for saving in key areas, some guidance on how to use those savings to improve your financial well-being, and a quick look at the good that money can do. This sort of slide is normally called the good, bad, and the ugly. That certainly doesn't work with this picture. And as Sophie's on this meeting, I certainly couldn't have done that. But the ugly describes my financial situation. When I was in my early 30s, I owed 2/3 of my salary on credit cards, was not in control. This is someone who'd got an A at A-level economics and studied it at university, but my actual financial literacy was pretty low and I wasn't making any progress, but I decided to change. So the first good is that I wrote myself a letter. I switched to using cash instead of cards, established a pot for day-to-day spending and a pot for holidays, and I had an end goal with a time frame. That plan worked, and by 45, I was FI, which means I didn't need to work for money. And at 47, I'd retired. The second good is I set up a small CIC. When I hear about the scale of Tom's organization, it's very small, called Sustainably Enough, which has provided free guidance to help people decide what's enough and how to obtain that enough. I've helped others to reduce their spending, save, and to give effectively. There are many ways we can use psychology to improve our situation. But the first is, one of the challenges in financial well-being is the unwillingness to share our situation and the belief that everyone else is doing better than us. And this can create a sense of powerlessness. These figures are from 2021, and the situation has deteriorated significantly since then. Worries about money are pervasive and affect individuals in a whole range of circumstances. And worrying about money has a significant impact on our well-being. We can get into a cycle whereby our worrying about money makes it harder to improve our situation. But the good news is that same cycle can work in our favor. Some sections of society benefit from a widespread misunderstanding about finance. So let's just dispel some quick myths. There are many reasons for people being frugal, such as early lifetime experiences, saving for something that makes us happy, environmental reasons, or just because we don't want others to feel bad. There's also a pervasive belief that spending makes us happy, but it is rarely the case. Paying off debt and having an emergency fund have a much bigger impact on our happiness than spending does. In an era of easy credit, some people think that saving doesn't matter. But having an emergency fund has been shown to improve our subjective well-being significantly. Finally, it's assumed that outward appearances are a good guide to how well someone is doing. In fact, the only information we get from what someone spends is that they have less money and more things than they would have had. We live in a world that isn't conducive to improving our financial situation, but there are a number of changes to our environment that we can make. We can use cash instead of cards. This increases the pain of spending and makes us more conscious of what we are spending. It also helps us to be healthier. We can provide reminders to ourselves of the hard work that we put in earning money. Things like our real wage after tax and expenses can help us put our spending into context. We can remove easy ways to buy, such as apps for shops. I'll admit I had an Amazon app, and in 1 year I placed over 500 orders just because it was so easy. And when I uninstalled that app, they reduced dramatically. We can ensure we eat properly and protect our willpower and start simple routines to help us save money. If we want to work out the best ways for us to improve our situation, it's helpful to understand what the sciences of happiness and spending tell us. The research tells us that we're not very good at spending money in ways that support happiness, and that's because we fall into a number of traps. We're poor at predicting how we will feel after we buy or do something. We habituate to things quicker than we expect, and we fail to learn this lesson repeatedly. We compare ourselves to inappropriate others, including famous people and curated social media profiles, and we conflate money with time. We stop spending time on things because we worry about the money we could be earning. So how should we spend our money? Well, Elizabeth Dunn and Michael Norton provide some excellent advice in their book, Happy Money. We should buy experiences, make it a treat, buy time, pay now and consume later, and invest in others. So when we buy experiences, we get a number of benefits. We can connect to others when we enjoy the experience. We can talk about our experiences without making others feel worse. We're less likely to compare our experiences to others' experiences, and the experiences get better over time, and we don't need to service them. We probably all remember the enjoyment that Charlie Bucket gets out of his chocolate bar, but our brains notice changes. So if something becomes routine, the pleasure reduces significantly. When we make things a treat, we can savor them more. We can avoid habituation, remain grateful for all the treats, and most importantly, we can do everyday things and enjoy them. Buying time is important because it allows us to avoid unpleasant things such as commuting and housework. If we have time, it makes us feel richer, and thus we have less need to prove our wealth. It allows us time to volunteer, which increases happiness. We can enjoy everyday things and not feel time pressured. It also allows us to focus on the activity that we're doing, which means we're more likely to enter a flow state. If we aren't sure what activities to use our money to avoid, there's some useful data about what activities people enjoy. We might want to use that money to avoid housework or to automate some of it, whether that be a dishwasher or a robot hoover. It can also allow us to see that a higher paying job with a longer commute isn't necessarily such a great idea. The next one's rather counterintuitive, but paying in advance has a host of benefits, including allowing us to time travel, see the future as bright, build the context, enjoy the activity without worrying about the cost. It also allows us to flip the dominant narrative of buying now and paying later. We often get more enjoyment from the contemplation of a holiday, for instance, than the actuality of it. The contemplation doesn't need to deal with delays and niggles that we might have when we're actually on holiday. And investing in others is the final way that we can spend smartly. In one study, spending on others did much more for participants' happiness than spending 4 times as much on themselves. On an individual level, giving has the same happiness impact as doubling our household income. And on a national level, giving is the equivalent of a 7-fold increase in GDP for a nation's happiness. We are naturally generous. We make connections through giving, and we can reduce our cortisol levels, which are a sign of stress. Giving also helps us to gain an abundance mentality, which means we feel more secure, and it can make us more successful at work. To work best, we should have a connection to the recipient, have a choice about who we give to, and be able to see the impact of our giving. So what can we do on a practical level? The first place to start might be to look at where we spend our money. This shows where typical households spend their money, and we look at some of the big ticket items. So housing is often the biggest chunk of our expenditure, and it's a classic case of miswanting, whereby we incorrectly predict what we want. There are 2 big requirements for housing. It needs to be close to where we need to be, and it needs to be quiet. What doesn't seem to matter is how big our house is and how posh our neighbours are. Transport's also a big spend category, and most of that goes on cars. Unfortunately, cars are very poor at making us happy, as we habituate to them super quickly. When we're driving, we aren't thinking about the car itself, but are annoyed at being stuck in traffic and about all the things that we have to do, but we can't because we're stuck in traffic. They also represent staggeringly poor value for money. We don't actually get to most places particularly quickly. In Bristol, for example, the average traffic speed is 11.9 miles an hour. We can do that on a bike. When we take into account the time that we have to work to buy, service, insure, and run a car, speed is in fact much slower, possibly as slow as walking. We will all have noticed the increase in food prices, but we can reduce our spend in this area. The next slide will show the savings a typical household can make by switching supermarkets, and there are other ways that we can reduce our spends without making any real sacrifice. The 4th topic is stuff, which holds so much promise, but we get used to it very quickly. And time spent looking for, buying, looking after, and disposing of things we better put to other activities. It can also make other people feel worse. This next slide's pretty busy, but it basically details what you can save by switching supermarkets. I can vouch for this change. As a family, we switched from Tesco to Aldi, and our annual food bills dropped from 4,700 in 2020 to 4,200 in 2022. That is for 4 effectively adults, with 2 adults and 2 teenagers. So what does make us happy? Well, we've looked at ways that we can spend our money smarter, but much of what makes us happy doesn't cost anything or very much. Sonia Lyubomirsky from the University of California found that our happiness was determined 50% by our genes, 10% by our circumstances, and 40% by our intentional activities. So 80% of our controllable happiness is due to what we choose to do. She provides some further guidance in her book, The How of Happiness, and the things we can do to improve our happiness include practicing gratitude and thinking positively, investing in social connections, managing stress, hardship, and trauma, living in the present, committing to our goals, taking care of our body and soul. And all of these are remarkably cost effective. So why does all this matter? Well, what we've talked about so far can have a significant impact on our ability to save. And that's vitally important to gain control of our financial situation. A £1,000 emergency fund can increase our subjective well-being by 2 points on a 20-point scale. That's the equivalent of moving from the US to Finland in terms of our happiness. Even a £100 buffer can have a significant impact. Saving money and applying it to debt can also be very effective, and being debt-free is psychologically very beneficial. Even small savings can have a significant effect on our control of our situation, especially over time. When we have enough savings to have an emergency fund and pay off high interest debts, we can think about how to build further financial resilience by investing. Many people will tell you that investing is complicated and that you need to be advised how to do it. In reality, most of the benefits of investing can be obtained by following 2 simple rules: keep your fees low and diversify. A third bit of guidance is you have to be prepared to accept that it is risky and choose a level of risk that you can cope with. But be aware that the risk over the long term is very different in nature to the risk over the short term. The right asset allocation, by that I generally mean cash, shares and bonds, will vary by individuals, but the key is understanding how long and what you're investing for. You can invest in funds which are low cost and avoid harmful stocks very cheaply, roughly 0.2% per annum. That might not sound important, but I'll briefly explain how it is in the next slide. Also, depending on how secure you are and how much you want to help solve social problems, you can invest in solutions. I mentioned that costs are important. It's difficult to comprehend how important they are, but I'll use a simple example to show that. Imagine having a £10,000 lump sum to invest, which would be nice, and getting a 5% return for 30 years. If you pay 1% in fees, you end up with about 32,000. But if you only pay 0.2%, you'll end up with 41,000. The extra fees mean that you give 27% of all your profits to the investment company, and they don't generally need the money. In June, I did a presentation on investing in renewable energy, which is available online, and here are some conclusions from that. But overall, investing in renewable energy is a pretty efficient way of reducing carbon emissions globally, especially if you can do it through your pension. And there will be other solutions that you can invest in. Your investments can allow you to realize some of your goals, and there is one way to think about, and here is one way to think about those goals. We will all be at different places on this pyramid. And here are some more concrete examples of what those goals might be. And short, medium and long term, that will mean different things to different people, but there are some examples that you might want to consider. And money can be enormously powerful, especially if we can use it internationally. The reason why I set up Sustainably Enough was to encourage others to enjoy the benefits of giving. Those benefits are maximized if we can give impactfully. That impact can be very significant, as can be seen here, again, especially if we do that internationally. It may be that you think individual action isn't enough and society needs to change. I wasn't told to say this, but one way you can give impactfully is to give to the Green Party in Stroud District. It already has a significant impact in Stroud. There's a real opportunity to have a massive impact county-wide. I know that I've covered an enormous amount here, and I'm more than happy to talk to anyone about what I've explained here. You can just drop me an email to this address and we can set up an online meeting to discuss. I'm happy to support people to make change because I know that knowing is only half the battle, and I will never charge for that guidance and get ample reward from seeing others gain control over their financial situation, give and live more sustainably. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gary. That was so interesting. Like usually I take so many notes when people are talking, and I've barely taken any notes because I was just like so listening so intently. So thank you very much for being our second speaker and giving us sort of that different perspective of maybe if you're in a slightly more financially stable situation, and then what you can do to take yourself to the next level in terms of your happiness, giving to others, and yeah, making sure that you've got those like medium to long-term goals in mind. I think that you briefly mentioned GDP, and I think that that's like this whole subject is really interesting when you look at GDP. I mean, I work for the Global Greens now, and they have a committee on reimagining GDP, and I know that there's a lot of people that are working on this and like trying to push governments and push different organizations to measure on happiness rather than measuring on the amount of money that comes out of a country or whatever it might be. But yeah, I mean, focus on happiness, invest in solutions. I really like that. The renewable energy thing right at the end, I think, was really interesting. So thank you very much for that. I think we've had quite a lot of activity in the chat. So I'm just going to go over to the chat. I mean, Tom already answered the first question, I think, which is around how people would know about it. But the second answer to that, like we said earlier, is just to make sure that people are telling people about these kinds of services, not just Tom's Fair for You, but also everything that Gary has been talking about. Okay, so our second question, I think is from Simon Pickering. Simon, are you there? And do you want to come and ask your question? Is Simon still here? Oh, yeah, I can see you now. Oh, we can't hear you, Simon. It does say you're unmuted though. Weird. Okay, we can't hear you. Try and sort that out and we will.
Okay, I'll come back to you. Okay.
No, you put your in now. We can hear you now.
I just pulled the jack plug out. I think I've got a dodgy mic thing. Okay.
Okay, no worries.
Okay, right. So a couple of questions is one, just thinking about in terms of greater sustainability, if you can afford it, should you spend your money buying food from a local farm to support the local economy rather than saving money buying food from a cheaper supermarket? That's one question to Gary or whoever. And the other one was, I was just wondering whether Gary had looked at philanthropic sort of investment in terms of loaning money directly to others to insulate their homes, the loans paid back by energy savings.
Yeah,
Great questions.
I'll pick up the first question. I think there is a real benefit from more sustainable food systems, but I'm not sure everyone's got the choice. It can be more expensive, and I think there's also a little bit around what's the trade-off. If you can save money on your supermarket spend and not buy from, say, I don't know, the place at Hawkwood, I can't remember what it's called, those sort of places. Depends what you do with that money. If you use that for your holiday and fly off to Australia, that's really, really bad for the environment. But if you use that in an environmentally friendly way, whether that's, I don't know, one of the things I do is protect rainforest and in indigenous areas, well, it might be that provides a bigger benefit, but it probably is better in itself to get it from local farms, subject to them having a reasonable yield and not using up too much land for that. But not everyone would have that choice, but it's a fair choice to make, of course it is.
Thanks, Gary. I think the second question was, Simon, tell me if I'm wrong, about investing by directly giving loans to people for insulation.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking slightly sideways as well. Sort of, if you've got spare money and you want to invest it ethically, should you be investing it locally to, say, you know, your neighbour who you trust, for them to insulate their houses and for them to pay you back with the energy savings over, say, a 5 or 10-year period. I don't know whether anybody's done that. It was just an idea I just had sitting here thinking about what Gary was saying about how you invest your money ethically.
I don't know to what extent Tom's thought about that, but that's maybe another avenue for his organisation. Although I suppose there's probably limits to how much money they've got to lend, and there's other ways. But there is a pretty good payback period, and that may work pretty quickly. But I don't know. It's quite, where I live, it's quite difficult to lend it to my neighbours because they're richer than I am. So I think they want my money. If that could work and there could be returns on that, because the payback period on energy efficiency is pretty good. It should be being done by government, but we all know, well, probably since Tom left Parliament, that the government's not been very supportive of that sort of stuff. But it's a good way to use it if people are genuinely in that poverty. But I do make the point that internationally, our money goes even further, because, whilst things are really hard in the UK, they're much harder in other places around the world too. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Tom?
Thanks, Gary.
There are peer-to-peer lending mechanisms which exist, which I've been involved in a couple, which tend to lend to small businesses rather than to small and micro businesses rather than to individuals. But they're actually having great trouble, and they're dissuading people from investing in them at the moment. And I don't see them coming back again. So I also feel that if you get into a one-to-one lending relationship, you get in it is a sort of power relationship, which it seems to me can easily go wrong. So I think it is better to do it through communal investment. I have three sort of areas where I put investments, two of which I don't expect to get anything back on. One is a community hydropower scheme in my old patch up in Derbyshire. One is a brewery called Toast, which makes beer out of surplus bread and then gives all its profit to charities which dispose of food waste. And the other, and I must add at this point that I'm not a financial advisor, is to invest in the Triodos Bank investment funds, which go into green and socially positive investments, small companies, but also, I believe, individuals as well. So my first place to look would probably, in general terms, be to Triodos, but this is not an official FCA approved announcement.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, Triodos is doing great work and actually have a base in Bristol, I think, so not too far away from Stroud. But yeah, loads of fantastic green sustainable investments through them. Like Tom said, not an approved announcement. Okay, I think our next question is from Martin Sabbath. Martin? Oh, hi, I can see you, Martin. Great, thanks.
Hi. Tom, I was wondering about if giving people the help they obviously really need, the £75, doesn't that give people a sort of taste of something, and then they don't have it anymore? How does it help people in the long term? What is the long-term aid?
On the question of taste, there is a myth out there that people in poverty are in poverty because they don't know how to handle money. That really isn't true.
Lack of money, Tom, rather than not knowing how to handle it.
Well, indeed, lack of money, yes. But the money that they've got, they're very canny how they spend it. I have to say, without being wanting to be prejudiced about this, I have to say that 70% of our customers are women, and they really know what they're talking about when it comes to managing their family finances. But no, you're right, £75 is not going to be a long-term solution. But one thing it does do is it does help them to improve their creditworthiness. And that means it's easier for them to be able to get a cheaper loan next time round. One of the really daft things about measuring someone's creditworthiness is you can pay rent on time every month for years, and the creditworthiness score is not affected by that. It's because rent isn't regarded as something that you can demonstrate your creditworthiness on. So I mean, we do take people's rent payments into account. Oh, thank you for the various rounds of applause from people. We do take people's rent payments into account, and clearly rent is a very, very big item in household spending for the sort of people that we serve through Fair for You.
Thanks for your question, Martin, and for the answer. Tom, Gary, I don't know if you want to come in on that briefly, but if not, then no problem, but please do.
No, well, I think the key thing is, and this is what a lot of Tom's organisation does, it avoids people choosing worse options, which are much worse for people, you know, and if people are so desperate for food, then they're likely to make really bad choices, not because they don't know how to make choices, but because it's a desperate situation. And the more we can avoid people doing that, gives them a bit of space. And having a buffer is so important. It'd be better if they had it themselves, of course it would. But unfortunately, in our society, there aren't enough people who are in that position.
And it has to be said that the food, if you're on a low income, the food that you can afford is not good quality food. We need to find ways of helping people on low incomes to eat better. And actually, one of the things we're looking at with Iceland is the possibility of doing special deals on freezers, because freezers do tend to conserve nutritional value of food despite the energy issues around them. But nevertheless, I mean, that's why Iceland was set up in the first place, to provide cheap quality food. But,
yeah, absolutely. I think it's, you know, very interesting what you're saying there around access to good quality food and what that means for families. When you look at poorer areas across the UK that are full of fast food services that are sort of cheap and on the surface very quick and easy to get, but in the long term will have like very serious health effects that will affect people in the long run. Thank you, Martin, for your question. And I'm running through, and I see that Adrian is actually here, Tom. So
yes,
the matchmaker that was there at the beginning, would you like to come in and ask your question?
Yeah, hi Tom, hi everyone. Sorry I missed the start. Yeah, I just, Rishi Sunak got a lot of ridicule, quite rightly, last week for his big idea of making everybody staying on to 18 and study maths. I hated maths at school. I couldn't see the point of it. Nobody explained it to me. I had a lousy maths teacher, and that's why I haven't got a maths O level. But I think what I would say as a question to both Tom and Gary, don't we actually need to be teaching better life skills, which include issues around budgeting, what a pension is, what APR means, what credit means, how to live with the money and make the money work for you rather than working to earn money to keep the wolf from the door.
Thanks,
Wanna go
Adrian.
first, Tom?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Tom. Let's go first.
Sure.
With Tom and then Gary.
Thank you, Adrian. You're bringing back a memory of 40 years ago and another one from yesterday. 40 years ago, I was living in Stroud and commuting every day with a guy called Stuart Butler, who'll be known to quite a few of you, I think, because we were both teaching at Brockworth School together. And one of the pupils at Brockworth School was Simon Pegg, later to become Chief Engineering Officer on the USS Enterprise in the Star Trek films, amongst other things. But Simon has been commenting on Rishi Sunak's maths aspirations this week. I dare not repeat the things that Simon said on there, but it's on Twitter or TikTok or whatever. But basically, he was saying, you know, we ought to be teaching culture and the arts to everyone if we're teaching maths to everyone. But and quite right too. But yeah, the other day I had reason to look at the Lloyds Bank website for advice to people on how to manage money. And that's exactly what it was. It was how to manage money. It wasn't how to manage no money. It wasn't how to, you know, how to survive at the bottom. And one of the things that the Fair Credit Charity, which is the charity which owns Fair For You, the charity which I chair, wants to do is to work on financial education. We don't want to reinvent the wheel, but we do want appropriate finance education taught in schools. There's lots of stuff out there available to schools, but as I say, most of it is not focused on the needs of poorer families. So there needs to be a sort of qualitative shift in what's taught. And without being overtly political, citizenship was taken off the school curriculum in 2010 by David Cameron, and that's where things like how to manage a household budget, what is a mortgage, how much should I be putting into my pension when I start work, those sort of questions would have been considered, yeah, I'll leave it there for now. I could go on about this all night.
Thanks, Tom. Gary?
There's a couple of things that are and the first is that is in danger of being captured by financial interests, which might not be right for people. And the second is, I did A-level maths, doesn't mean I can control my money. And actually, is maths any more important than what we might call the liberal arts, which teach us how to live and live in a way that's fulfilling? The maths of most of this stuff isn't complicated. It's really primary school maths. And I know a lot of people don't reach that level, which is a bit of a tragedy in itself. But the maths itself isn't complicated. It's about being able to make choices on the best way to live, and also having a society where people don't have to make these choices. And your UBI talk that we're going to next week is the sort of thing that gives people some of the freedoms to then explore how they can live their life in the best way. The financial stuff, is helpful and would do no harm, but then there's a question of what it pushes out. And if it pushes out people's understanding of how to live their kind of best life and what actually makes them happy, then the financial bit might actually be detrimental. But there is clearly a lack of financial literacy, but there's also a lack of other things too, which might matter just as much.
Absolutely. Thanks, Gary. And thanks for your question, Adrian. I feel like the British education system actually just teaches us to be good workers, and it doesn't teach us to be good anything else. So I think it needs a complete overhaul, not just small little pieces added on in the end. But that's just me, and I'm ready for a revolution. Not just in education, but in lots of other areas as well. Okay, we've got a question from Carol. If you want to come on, Carol.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Tom and Gary. I remember you in Stroud too, Tom, though you probably don't remember me.
Remember your name, Carol.
Yeah. I think my question might be a bit out of the scope of this meeting, but whilst I've been involved locally with trying to cover up the cracks in the system by, providing free food, free or affordable food, warm spaces, etc. locally, I've just got this nagging feeling at the back of my mind that by doing that, which we obviously have to do, we're just covering up the underlying causes of an unfair capitalist system, which just seems to be getting worse and worse. So I know there's not an easy answer to this, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts are.
Capitalism, Carol, love it. Okay, let's see what our speakers think. Tom, have you got any comments on it?
Well, the answer to Carol's question in the chat there is clearly yes. You are covering up, you are mitigating the underlying problem of an increasing unfair element in society. I happen to think that capitalism is just a toolbox, though. There are tools in there that you can use. Fair For You does everything other businesses do, but we do it for a different purpose and we do it in a different way. But it's still the same tools. We're still investing, we're employing, we're spending, and we're making the same sort of calculations, but to a different end. So it's not inevitable. I also happen to think that, quotes, the capitalist system, unquotes, is not uniform, and that what's happened in the last 20 years, since just before the crash of 2008, is that the the world of high finance has become increasingly distant from the rest of the economy, and it has become another world where pay levels bear no relation to pay levels in the rest of the economy, where purpose plays very little, purpose other than the maximization of profit plays very little, and where goals are increasingly short term. Now, that is not how the majority of business operates. It is how the finance sector operates. And that's why, if you like, Fair for You is showing we are a finance company, but we're a finance company who does things completely differently than the way that other finance companies do. So I think I've probably qualified my answer to your question, but the bottom line question is unfortunately yes.
Thanks, Tom. Gary?
Yeah, I agree that what Tom's doing is dulling the revolutionary impetus that we all have. But what's the choice? You know, we can sit there and wait for this to happen. But actually, that change sometimes doesn't come when people are in desperate situations. People find it easier to change when they have some control. So maybe what Tom does allows people to create space where they can see what's wrong with the system, rather than worrying about the immediate stuff. I see Simon's added to that. I don't know if you can clarify a bit about Simon, to Carol's point where you made in the chat.
I was sort of really just thinking about your principles of thinking about happiness and money. Now, really, if somebody's got no money at all, that's obviously a really difficult point. But if you've got a little bit of money, and how that applies to those principles and thinking about it, and if you've only got a small amount of money, some of your principles do cross over with that, and then making the absolute leap of using your principles, possibly on something that Tom mentioned, applying those to, capitalism. In that, if you had a capitalist society working on your principles, would it be different?
Yeah, I suspect it would be rather different if the purpose of that capitalist society, which is, as Tom says, is to achieve purposes. If those purposes change, the whole system changes. How easy it is to cause that change in purpose, I don't know, but certainly it doesn't take everyone to want to obey the principles about putting happiness first over above economic growth. How we bring that into play, I don't know, but certainly it would take a lot of the pressure out of the system if people didn't feel insecure and didn't feel like they needed to do things which may not be beneficial to them in the short term, or to the planet and the environment. Can
I just come in on that as well?
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Simon's added sort of an extra dimension, I think, to the question. I'm going to give you a very, very quick history lesson, if I may, using a visual aid. So Gary had slides, I had a visual aid. This is a book, I call it my Bible, because it's written by W.A. Biebel, and it was published in 1926. And it's called The Romance of Great Business. And there's a chapter on all of the big businesses in Britain at the time in 1926. So it's got Lever Brothers, it's got Boots, it's got Hartley's Jam, Dunlop Tires, and so on. And there's just a few pages about each one and how they've developed over the previous 30 or 40 years since the end of the 19th century. And it's incredible reading it because it's all about purpose. It's all about mission. It's all about being good to your employees. It's all about providing a quality of service and a quality of goods. And I think two things happened in the years after that, which really changed things. The first was in the 1930s, when GDP was generally adopted as a measure of progress. That's not how the economist Simon Kuznets designed it. It was never used for what he designed it for. But the whole point about GDP is it's very, very selective in what it measures. And the thing it really misses out in the measurement is what we call externalities. So it talks about the profit a company can gain from its manufacturing process. It doesn't talk about the cost of the externalities. So it doesn't talk about the cost of the pollution, the cost of the resource depletion, the cost of government support for workers who are not being paid enough, those sort of things. So the fact that we've had nearly 100 years of being focused on GDP is exactly the wrong measure to be measuring progress by. Now, as Gary will know, there are various happiness indices out there. The one I prefer to use is called the Social Progress Index. And it basically shows that as poor countries get richer, their standard of living improves. As rich countries get richer, their standard of living does not improve. And there's no benefit to be gained for getting richer, for countries getting richer once they reach a certain point, which really is a good argument for redistribution of that wealth back into the poorer countries again. So I've come a long way, I'm afraid, in my discussion about fair for you and individual families' budgets. But you're absolutely right. You can't divorce all that from the nature of the system that's behind it and the mistakes that have been made. And the one, just to add in there, 1970, Friedman's doctrine that the business of business is business, you know, that the purpose of business is to maximize profit. So the GDP and the Friedman approach in the 60s and 70s, they perverted, I think, the rather beautiful situation being described in this book of 100 years ago.
Thanks, Tom. Fantastic history lesson and very much appreciated. Gary, tell me if you want to come back on any of Tom's points.
Difficult to follow that. I agree with it entirely. But societies have a choice about whether, and I think Simon's just said a similar point, about what they encourage organizations to do and what their purposes are. One very easy way around that would be, and actually one of the other causes is the significant reduction in marginal tax rates, Tom, which encourage people to think more and more about finance because they kept so much more, and there were the attractions of that became almost overwhelming for people at the top of businesses, when in fact, even in their own interest, they may have been better off having organizations that fulfilled a purpose that wasn't just making money.
Absolutely. I think this is a really fantastic subject, and we could actually go totally off piste and discuss the fall of capitalism, the nightmare of GDP, and the benefit of focusing on happiness and health above everything else. But I see that we've just got 20 minutes left. So, I mean, I'll invite any more questions right now. If not, we will move to our two speakers to give us sort of like a final 1 minute takeaway. Like, what if nobody was listening for this entire thing, what would you want them to take away in this 1 minute or 30 seconds right at the end? Obviously everybody has been listening intently, but it's just to say, what is the takeaway from this session? What do you want people to pass on to their friends or to summarize this Cloud Cafe with? So I don't see any more questions in the chat, so I'm going to pick on Tom to go first.
Well, there is a question from Simon, which I'm dying to answer.
Oh, right. Sorry. Yes. No. Oh, sorry. I thought that was the add-on already, but there's another one. My apologies. Go for it, Tom.
Simon's asked about reform of Section 172 of the Companies Act, which is a popular reform. And just to fill people in, the Section 172 of the 2006 Companies Act basically describes, says that businesses should know what they're for and know what their purpose is. But there is the easy assumption that they, as alluded to just now, that they're there to maximize returns to shareholders. And that's been but it's not exclusively that. In fact, Section 172, as it currently reads, would allow everything, all sorts of options for the purpose of business to be included. If it didn't, then you couldn't have B Corp, you couldn't have social enterprises, but they do exist and they're legal. So you can argue that Section 172, as it's currently constituted, does allow the good use of the tools of capitalism for the purposes that we've been talking about tonight. The problem, and I am a former legislator, and I say that don't put all your eggs in the basket of legislation. It takes 10 years to bring a Companies Act together. There isn't one on the horizon. The opportunity to change Section 172 is not currently there. It would take a long time to get it, and you can't even, of course, guarantee that that is the outcome you'll get from it. But of course, Section 172 has not stopped B Corps, it's not stopped social enterprises. It's not very helpful, but it's not very damaging either. So yes, it's a useful focus for campaigning. The reason why Simon says that B Corps are lobbying for the change is because the B Corp movement essentially is an American movement where up until the existence of B Corps 20 years ago, you had to maximize profit. That was the legal obligation on companies, but it was in America. It was never the case in British law. And so I think what has happened is that when the B Corp movement came over here, they carried on campaigning on the same thing which they'd made their mark on in America, which possibly they'd have been better advised looking at a different way of doing it. But by all means, work for purposeful business. By all means, work for businesses to have social and environmental missions, but don't wait for legislation. Legislation tends to follow good practice rather than lead it, in my experience, in this area.
Thanks, Tom. Gary, any comments on this area? No, okay, fantastic. I mean, I don't know if anybody wants to briefly explain to us about the B Corp movement. Just very briefly, because some of us might not know.
I can do that if you like.
That would be great. Summarize it for us, Tom.
As I was just saying, in America, companies were obliged to have the maximization of profit as their purpose. And a group of companies about 20 years ago started to campaign to change the rules. I've actually been to the very first B Corp. It's called the Greystone Bakery. It's in Yonkers in New York City. And basically at that time, it was, what happened was that there was a guy, a Buddhist Jew, whose job was to work with four ex-prisoners and help them not to go back into jail. And so they decided to bake biscuits. And today the Greystone Bakery is massive. It employs 80 people on the shop floor, and it only employs people who've got the qualifications to be there. And the two qualifications they look for, you've either got to be an ex-prisoner or an ex-addict. They won't employ anyone else there. And so the initial purpose of the company was to help people have an alternative to prison, to keep them out of prison, to stop them becoming recidivists. So they campaigned for this. And I think at the end of the day, they only won the right to have a social purpose in about 6 states across America. But one of them was Delaware. And Delaware is where 80% of all American businesses are registered. Guess why? It has the lowest rates of corporate tax. But once it's possible to do it in Delaware, it was effectively possible to do it everywhere. And so they managed to change the law in Delaware. They managed, therefore, to make the B Corp movement available to any company in America and beyond in the world. But of course, bringing it over here, situations were rather different. It was very, very slow to take off. It's accelerated in the last 5 years or so. It's still only got about 1,000, I think, B Corp within this country, but that's 500 more than it had 2 years ago, and probably 800 more than it had 5 years ago. So it is growing. And these are companies with a social and/or environmental purpose, which is written into their constitution. And that's the thing about them. They're not perfect as a movement. I asked a B Corp chief executive recently what about his scope 3 carbon emissions? And I had to explain to him what scope 3 carbon emissions were. But nevertheless, it's great that there are people who want to use the tools of business, as phrase I used earlier, to create public good, and that's what B Corps do.
Thanks, Tom, for that. Again, another little lesson, appreciated. And yeah, great. Sorry, Gary. No, yeah,
sorry,
Gary,
Jane,
go ahead.
I just add to that. Community interest companies are actually pretty easy to set up and a reasonably effective vehicle for people who want to do this on a small scale as well as a large scale. You know, people think it's quite difficult to set up organisations. It's actually super quick in the UK to set up organisations. And actually CICs, as long as you've got a proper purpose and know what you're doing, why you're doing something, are actually relatively straightforward. And actually the UK does pretty well on that. I know we like to criticise UK legislation, but CIC legislation is pretty good actually.
Yeah, we brought it in 2004. There's about 30,000 CICs now.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, well, all positive things to end on, which is great. We don't usually get much positive chat in the cloud cafes because we're always talking about very serious subjects, but it's nice to end on that. So, like I said before, the last thing that we usually do is ask our speakers to give a 30-second or 1-minute summary. What do you want people to take away from this? If either of you would like to go first, then signal to me now. But if not, I will pick on somebody. Okay, Tom, it's going to be you. I'm going to pick on you. Give us a 30-second takeaway from your session tonight.
The elevator pitch, yes. People who live on low incomes should not be deprived of having access to fair finance that doesn't exploit them, finance which treats them like human beings, companies which allow them to get the basic necessities into their home, whether it be a fridge or a washing machine. Washing machines are particularly popular, I have to say, amongst our customers. Fair for You has simply proved that this can be done without the need to maximize profit, with very high levels of customer care, and helping people in all sorts of ways with their mental health, with their finances, and with their long-term finances through improving their creditworthiness. So please take a look, and I thank you to people who've put in the chat that they're going to mention Fair for You to other agencies so people can refer people to us. Thank you for that. It'll be worth it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tom. Okay, Gary, what have you got for us, the final elevator pitch?
Well, I think some people have more choices than Tom's customers, whatever you call them, have. And those that do have a choice have a responsibility, if we can, to help make the situation better. And that partly starts by helping ourselves. And we have that, hopefully, some freedom to do that. And I'd encourage people to exercise that freedom. I'm more than happy to support people to do that. There's my details, and I've sent the slides to Elizabeth, and I'm happy for her to share. But we have a responsibility to help, and we can all help in different ways. But actually helping ourselves probably helps other people too, because I think Barbara makes the point around consumerism, helping, you know, a step back from consumerism helps other people too. And I think that's probably one of the real pressures that people face, is looking at other people. But we have some capability to change things. It can be hard, but those of us who have the opportunity to do so, the more that we can do that, the better, and the more that we can help people. And as I say, I'm more than happy to help people to do that.
Thanks so much, Gary. Thanks so much, Tom. I think you've left us with a lot of food for thought. You know, our economy in its current form is sort of dependent on our unhappiness and puts us in a cycle of unhappiness as well, which, like Gary said, if we have the power to break that, then break it for yourself and break it for other people as well. I like this whole message of purpose change equals system change. If you have the power to redefine the purpose of you or your business or your organization in order to make it a more positive, impactful entity, then definitely do. I think that if we want to make real change, like Tom said, you know, legislation can take 10 years to change. I think that means that we need more Toms in Parliament. So run for Parliament if you're thinking about it. Let's get more Toms elected so that we can shift GDP from profit money driven society that is built on the backs of workers to something that can work for everybody. I think it was Gary that said in his speech, and we didn't force him to say this, but please think about donating to Stroud District Green Party. They put these fantastic sessions on every week. There's a lot of hard work that goes on in the background, and we would really appreciate your donations. I'm going to put the donation link in the chat right now. There you go. As always, thank you to Elizabeth. Thank you to the people working in the background on these sessions. We'd love for you all to put your cameras back on and give us a smile and a wave at the end of this. Like I said at the beginning, these are recorded and the link will be shared. Please share it with people that you think this information would be valuable to know, because like I said earlier, if you don't know, then you don't know. And we can only find out by sharing the information and helping other people. I think that was everything. Have a wonderful end of January. I know it feels like the longest month in the world, but it will end, and the sun will set later, and the time between now and the summer will get much shorter. So enjoy yourselves, everybody. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you as always for joining us. And thank you to our two speakers for taking the time to educate us and inform us on these wonderful positive things that are going on in the world.
And thank
Thanks,
you,
everybody.
Jenny.
Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah.
My pleasure, as always.
Thank you.
Nice to see you all.
Yes, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
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 Bye all. Thank you.